Welcome to the review today of the Benchmade Fact. This has fast become one of my favourite facts, this knife. It is a new design for prototype 2017, but for the market 2018. Some other cool facts. In 1850, only 10% of people in the whole world knew how to read. Now it is up to 84%. That is a good fact. Because of Bill and Melinda Gates' foundation, polio has almost been eradicated from the world. That is a fact. Another fact is that Benchmade sent this knife to me for review, so I didn't have to pay for this knife. That is a fact, and one you should take into account when considering my opinion. However, I have had a pretty objective look at the knife and seen its pros and its cons, and I'll talk frankly about it. So let's get into the review of the Benchmade Fact. Let's start with some size comparisons. I smell a montage. So looking at the design of the knife, let's start there. This knife really reminds me of, say, like a theatre switchblade from something you might see in one of those like 70s films about youth gangs like the Warriors or something like that. It's got a certain classicness to it, but they're obviously going modern style as well with their materials and their fleshed out handles and that sort of thing. But it is really something unique to Benchmade. Benchmade don't have anything that looks like this at all, and so that's really, really good. I would say design cues, if not inspired by, it's similar to the Alma Eagle, especially the Talon version, which has this top swedge, and it is certainly probably similar level of utility to perhaps the heavy-duty version of that, whilst at the same time having better materials. So the blade here, it's still nice and thin. It is thickest at that middle point there, which is also probably the strongest point of it as well. When you're making shank-like knives, it is a wise move to add a top swedge, because it does make, if it is being used for poking and stabbing tasks, it does give the knife a level of rigidity through the center of it rather than through the top. So there is some sense to that decision there for sure. Knife is thumb stud deploying on an axis log, so still very much a Benchmade knife design. The handles are made of G10, and they are over obviously hollowed out stainless steel liners. So you can see the hollow goes all the way through the G10 as well, and on both sides the pocket clip just obscures it on this side. But if I was to take off the clip, there'd be two sort of oval gaps in the handle there. So that is to save weight and also to add a certain a visual appeal to the knife, and just a point of difference as well. The blade steel is S30V, and the blade is ground with obviously the swedge and then a saber grind. So my testing involved everyday carry use, and then obviously some review type use as well, to have A, things to show you, and B, ways to sort of test the knife in your standard, rather than just your standard things we use our EDC knives for, like cutting up food and taking tags off clothes and opening kids' toys and battery packets and things like that. So overall, the knife's performed really, really well. It's a longer blade. So this is just under a 4-inch blade. It's a fair sight bigger than even the 940s blade, which is getting towards being a mid to large size everyday carry. The best thing about this knife, and something that I love in knives in general, is that it has a very small carry footprint. Really, really thin little knife, but at the same time, the grind is as such that not only the primary grind is, it's thin enough, they have gone and put an extra long cutting bevel on it. So it's actually got a fairly low degree cutting bevel angle, so it actually slices and cuts really, really well. I did some EDC use, I did some testing, and then I did a rope cut test, and it easily passed 170 cuts with the factory edge, which is good after use. So it's certainly well done S30V. I haven't done a formal test with it. I just haven't got around to it, but it's definitely a good stock of S30V, and treated well and whatnot, to be able to cut for a good long time. Cutting and using with the knife is really enjoyable. It does have a fairly wily tip there, so the tip can be, it's something you need to take into account when you are doing, say, cuts near your legs and things like that. You could quite easily, if you're whittling away on wood, you could probably poke yourself a little bit easier with this tip than with, say, the tip of a a drop point style knife, very spear-like. But you're buying a knife that looks like that in the pictures. I assume you know what you're doing. In terms of the ergonomics and whatnot, it's quite simple. They're keeping it simple, as I always suggest knife companies do. Unless you're going to get a knife custom fitted, always buy for simple ergos rather than complex ones that might fit. Get basic ones that will most likely fit. And there's no problem here at all. It's a fairly square knife. It's got some corner to it. It really does. But it's your thumb lands quite happily on that sort of ledge on the spine there, and then sitting pretty positively on some reasonably well spaced jimping that's certainly not fine and toothy, just kind of just broader and just more track like. No problems at all. Really, really well done. Just good choices overall. They've ridged the G10 to add some nice texturing and some, it's not too aggressive, but certainly enough to keep it in hand if you were going to be putting this into a more aggressive use, I guess. So, and by aggressive, obviously, there's no doubt about it. It does look a tad more weapony than most other Benchmades, and combined with the action, people are going to see this and think, Switchblade, the Warriors are coming, the Warriors are coming. And yeah, sure enough, you can't really get past that illusion. It's what, it's what they've gone all in on it. And you'd have the same problem if you bought the Almar Falcon or a Cold Steel Holdout or Tie-Light or something like that. It's just these style blades. They look old-fashioned and stiletto-like, and it's cool. It's part of the appeal to knife guys, but you've got to acknowledge it's going to be part of the non-appeal to non-knife people. People are going to say, whoa, that looks like a shank. They're going to throw out adjectives and words that harken back to the good old days of rampant knife crime in the Bronx. It's fine, but it's just something you've got to be aware of. It's a 4-inch blade as well, so it's you're going to have to check your legalities and just going to have to assess whether you want to be carrying a 4-inch blade for EDC in front of other people. There isn't really a discreet way of using a knife that has 4-inch blade. You're just going to be either trying to do it out of sight, or you're going to be letting people know, or you're going to be just using it with abandon and saying, screw it, it's a big knife. Deal with it, fellas. Deal with it. So yeah, the axis lock action is fine. You can pop and flick it open once it's broken in a little bit. It's just a good axis lock. I think most people are fans of the axis lock. I think it's one of the more popular locks. Great because you don't have to have your fingers in the blade path at any point, and you can truly one-hand open it once you've got the knack for it. But yeah, ideally the best thing about it though is it is safe. You don't have to push a liner across and have a blade falling across your thumb. You don't have to lock, unstick a lock back and then fold it with two hands. It's a good efficient lock. Various people have various things to say about the spring durability and that sort of thing. I've seen these fail before, but I've seen lockbacks fail. I've seen most things fail. I think as long as you're not going to be prying carbonnates off with this knife, the axis lock's going to do you just fine. The steel choice, I'm totally happy with. I've said it a few times, people get a misconception about me that I'm a complete steel snob. S30V is absolutely fine for any person. It's not too bad to sharpen. You might find the S35VN's a little easier to sharpen, and I dare say things will probably go the way of S35VN in most companies, I would guess. And once all the S30Vs, maybe the stock's gone or whatever, but it's definitely nothing to snort at. It's absolutely fine. It's quality powder steel. And it's worth paying a little bit extra for a quality powder steel versus, say, some of the Benchmades that still come in 154 cm, which, while not a bad steel, you'll get a bit more wear resistance and just a bit more capability from it. Absolutely. Yeah, I would love to have all knives in M390, but it's just not realistic at this stage. So S30V, totally fine with it. One thing you're going to be aware of with Benchmade is that they're going to have excellent customer service, and they're going to do clip swaps for you and all sorts of things for you. They're going to life sharpen your blade, all that sort of stuff, but they're going to be a little bit on the pricier side. So this is Benchmade retailing at $210. But obviously Benchmade's website retail is the highest of the high. Look around, you'll probably get it for about $170 or so once it's in full distribution, which I think it might be. Yours won't have prototype November 2007 on the blade either. So that's another thing to be aware of. But yeah, I've used and enjoyed this knife greatly. I've taken it to work. I've used it around home. I've used it for a pretty broad and wide-ranging sense of types of things. And yeah, it can slice. It can do all the jobs. Whilst just looking a little bit more martial, perhaps. But you know, if you're buying it, you're not going to be surprised when you open it because you've seen a picture of it before you clicked buy. So there you go. It's nothing I really need to tell you. But yeah, it is deceptively large. Like it's thin in one way, but then when you do get it opened up, it's quite a long and large knife. So I guess alternatives to this would be maybe the Cold Steel Broken Skull, the Alma Eagle with the Talon, the Swedge. Maybe a Cold Steel tie light, things like that are probably going to be your alternatives, but I think this is probably the nicest out of all those in terms of materials, in terms of lock, and in terms of carry and all that sort of thing. And I have handled most, if not all of those knives at one point or another in my knife life. So there you go. In terms of knocks, apart from the price and apart from the just the overall, slightly aggressive look to it, which isn't a con to some, but is something you certainly need to factor in. This really is a knife that could be enjoyed by most people, as long as you've got the aptitude for handling a 4-inch blade, the awareness that the tip is quite, whilst very handy, can be quite wild and a little bit a bit of a learning curve to manage. Just at first, at the very least, I'm going to be honest, we're not all knife ninjas. We all muck up and we've all cut ourselves, and it's just one of those things. But apart from those pretty basic little things you should know rather than critiques, if you're happy to spend the money on it, you're going to get a good product. Benchmade's fit and finish, by a lot of accounts, is picking up. It's getting better. This one came absolutely fine. However, remembering that third fact I gave at the start, this is a review sample. Remembering that, this one's obviously got no problems. And if yours does have problems and you're in the US, you can send it back. They'll fix it up for you. The only problem is if you're in Australia, it can be a bit more of a pain. But my Contago came with a loose screw, or the screw sheath was too long, and so I had a screw that was pushing back and forward. They did send me a full set of replacement screws. It just took a couple of weeks, that's all. So yeah, Benchmade, I think we've all heard all of the groupthink on them at the minute, but with regard to this specific knife, it's different. It's very interesting. It is something that they haven't really done before. It's something that other companies have done, probably not as well as this as well. Alma make great knives, but they are a lot of money for AUS 8. The Alma is the same price as this, and it's AUS 8 and just micarta, and has a lot less strength to it. Even the one with the liners is not as highly produced, and they got good fit and finish, but in terms of the materials, you're just not getting as much. So this is probably the one I'd recommend if you're after a bit of a poker, a bit of a stabbier knife, So yeah, hope you've enjoyed this review. It's one to consider. If it looks like it's your cup of tea, then I can vouch for it. It's well made, it's well done, it's well executed, and I've enjoyed carrying and using it. As far as being my first review sample from Benchmade, it's a bit of a milestone for me. I did really, really appreciate being thought of by them, me with my pretty modest subscriber base and whatnot. So thank you very much to Benchmade for sending this out, and I'll see you all in the next video. And you'll definitely see this still appearing in my EDC from time to time. I guess the only other thing that I just thinking of now that I usually do bring up is this little part here. Never am too much of a fan of that, the gap there. Not as big a deal with an axis lock, but with a lock back it can sometimes cause little bits of paper or dust in your pocket to not make the lock work. Less of an issue here because the axis lock fits in to the top of the tang rather than the there's no this space here doesn't need to be clear of debris really. It'll just get pushed out during the mechanism, so it's fine. But just something aesthetically I never really particularly like it either, because this one's not as bad, but sometimes when this part hooks out a bit more, it can grab onto your keys as you pull a knife out. So that's another thing I would just bring up just as I finish. Sorry, I'm kind of going off the cuff. I had a written out spiel. I've covered all those things, but things jump into my mind. Another fact, if you will. So yeah, while facts and whatnot aren't as popular in today's world of echo chambers where we can pick the media we want, pick the quotes and citations we want, ignore the rest, I think this is one fact that'll serve most people pretty well. Benchmade fact. Like my little wrap up? I did too. I'll see you in the next one, guys. Bye now.